Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to waste any more time. Let me introduce you to our panel for this evening. First of all, we have Christina Ricci as Zelda Sayer. We have David Hofflin as F. Scott Fitzgerald. And finally, the extremely talented costume designer, Tom Broker. So I think we get a sense there of, towards the end of the series, we're starting to see the kind of the Zelda and Scott that we really know. The kind of the celebrity couple, this iconic, author and his wife, and I guess we're kind of getting a sense of the people that they're going to be at this point. But I'm really curious to know where the kind of the interest lies. And I know, Christina, you've been with this for a long, long time. So tell me about your starting point. What interested you about it? Where did it begin?
Well, I just happened to read Teresa's book, Z, a Zelda Fitzgerald novel, and I loved it. And I couldn't believe that I had such misconceptions about Zelda Fitzgerald. And so I thought, oh, well, someone's going to be making a movie of this. So I just had my manager call to find out who had the rights so that I could say I wanted to come and audition whenever. And then the rights were available. So, and I think that for me, what I really wanted was this idea of giving this woman who lives in myth, either adored or reviled, make her human, give her back her humanity. She's, so that was my main interest in it. And it's also fascinating. I mean, she was such an interesting person. Their relationship was so complex and fascinating. So, I mean, that's really what we hope to continue to discover and reveal more of.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose the really fascinating thing about their relationship, I mean, aside from the fact that it was documented by the newspapers quite heavily at the time, was that it was documented by Scott in his books, but it was very much Scott's view of that relationship, I guess, and much of it coming from Zelda. Were you surprised by the disconnect, I guess, between how Scott saw Zelda and how you found the real Zelda as you were kind of looking into this?
I wasn't surprised by it. Everybody has their version of a story and their version of who a person is. I just thought it was a shame that we've never heard her version of herself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And David, I have to ask, when someone approaches you and says, we'd like you to play F. Scott Fitzgerald, surely the nerves start.
Yeah. I mean, it happened kind of quickly, and I guess at that point in time, I guess it's like a sink or swim moment where there's so much pressure that you could put on yourself in how to accurately portray someone, but at the end of the day, it's just going to be your opinion. And whether it comes across or not is kind of like, that's secondary, you can't really do much about that. But certainly there was an element of nerve. The nerve? Yeah, it's an element of nerve. I don't know if you guys know that word, look it up. There was a lot of, initially there was a lot of pressure, I think, that I put on myself. But as time grew on, I think also as you sort of get used to the filming aspect of things and living with the character and the story for a while, it sort of settled down after a bit.
So I wonder what was the starting point for the two of you in terms of trying to figure out not just who these people were, but how you would play them.
Well, I mean, I did tons and tons of research about Zelda. I read 2 biographies. I read all of her writing that I could get my hands on. I read all of his writing. I read about that period of time in America. You know, I pretty much covered all my bases because it is very intimidating to play somebody who is kind of the stuff of legend, and you don't want to disappoint anyone or do anything or embarrass yourself. I mean, you know, that's really it, just trying to avoid embarrassment at all costs. But yes, I just did a ton of research.
I watched The Great Gatsby. It was about
Wait, which version? That's
yeah,
what
exactly. I actually haven't seen the new version. I've got to be honest, but I think you can go crazy doing so much research because there's so much stuff written about them, and then you. Not only that, but I mean, we've got obviously scripts to read, and there's an element of a storyline that Z is telling that, as you said, it's part of, or it's a person's view on what happened. So I think there's got to be a limit, or at least there was for me. There's a limit to doing research and then trying to work out how that relates to the actual work that you're doing. Because really, you can go a little bit up, in my opinion. I would have gone overboard trying to nut everything out. That's not going to happen.
Well, I mean, you know, it must be hard not to fall in love with these people. You know, I do think, I mean, you know, I've always had a passion for Scott's writing, but Zelda as well. She's just she just seems like the sort of person you want to be around, really. But at the end of the day, they are people. So you know, do you kind of avoid? Do you have to consciously avoid the icon status of them to a degree?
Well, yeah. I mean, for me, it's very much about playing a woman going through what we see her going through, and about it being very real and human and heartfelt, and you know, it's sort of like pulling back the curtain a little bit. So the celebrity aspect of it and the iconic kind of aspect of it was something I didn't even think of at all. Because except for the way that celebrity affected her behavior and how she felt about herself.
Well, how did you see that? I'm really curious. How did you see the way that it affected her, and how did you kind of?
Well, I mean, they were one of the first couples that was really famous for being a couple, and just sort of it was a time after World War I, when the class system was really changing, and there was a door, really opened a door for these two kind of celebrities to occur. And I think for her, coming to New York and having that amount of fame, I think both of them having that amount of fame at once, I don't think they ever recovered from it. You know, after that, if that's what at 18 your introduction to the world is, how do you ever top that ever again? So I think they were chasing that. I think that has a lot to do with the alcoholism and this need. You see, they moved all over the world and they were constantly searching for it. And I think what they were really searching for was reliving that initial rush again. And so that's why it was so important with the first season that you really felt that rush of fame.
And do you think that there was a public Zelda and a public Scott, and that their private versions were different? I do get the sense in the show that you know, there's an element of performance within that public persona that they both have.
I absolutely agree, and I wonder though, for me, I wonder if that performance stopped even when it was just the two of them together. You know, I think they very much were characters for each other, and then they probably kept themselves to themselves, and that's one of the reasons why they never really connected.
One of them, obviously, most...
Or they did connect. I can't say they never really connected, because I wasn't there. But I mean, I think, but you know, it might have been one of their problems. So.
Well, one of the most incredible aspects of this world is I mean, this period in world history, in American history, is so rich. I mean, it's so beautiful, it's so stunning. And Tom, I'm kind of building to introducing you here, because the styles of this era, and these two people were as stylish as people of this era ever got, are absolutely extraordinary. First of all, how much does it help you to kind of get into the look of the characters, the clothes of the characters in building your performance?
It helps. I mean, the second you change your physical appearance, there is something that follows internally. You know, it's sort of that act as if kind of thing. And so it had such a huge effect. And I mean, you gave the clothes such character. You know, the clothes themselves had character.
And Tom, I wonder if I could ask you, I mean, I sort of see the 20s as being the kind of the, you know, if you're going to pinpoint any era as being sort of definitive of fashion, it's the 20s. Right. So where does the research begin for you?
So, I mean, I'll sort of go back a little bit, you know, I mean, and sort of fill in a little bit of the historical thing. You know, I mean, I think part of the interesting thing about playing historical figures and people who are known is that there is a wealth of information about the people. So not only is there were writings and that sort of stuff, there are also photographs and newspaper clippings and all that sort of stuff, in addition to all just the general magazines and, you know, period stuff. So all of that gets filled in when you're playing historical people, but then you have to take all of that, funnel it through the character, and have, you know, then we're left, you know, with these two wonderful actors, you know, launching off to create then these new people who are Zelda and F. Scott and our versions of them, and how that gets translated into that. The interesting part about this show, for me anyway, is that it is a really ugly period until you actually get to know it. And then it's a really spectacularly beautiful period, because it's actually right before what we imagine is the most beautiful period in fashion, which is the later 20s. Mm-hmm. You know, from 1917 to 1923 is a transition period, because everything in America is actually starting. It's post-war, and the deterioration of all the stuff that happened in World War I into, you know, how the car became very important and transportation became very important. And so all of that had effects on the length of the skirts and how people moved and all that sort of stuff. And the balance of the hip proportion to the hat and all of that sort of stuff became very, very important. And the hair and all of that sort of stuff. And so when you start, you know, there were one or two times where we would bring clothes in, never with Christina, but some of the women would be like, I can't wear this thing. And you're like, no, it's very beautiful once you start going. And all the clothes have like 130 different snaps and hooks and that sort of stuff. So it takes like between the corset and the, you know, the slip and the hose and the, you know, everything, it just would take everyone such a long period of time.
For that, we had the first episode that we shot together, we had a sex scene. And the director was like, it'd be great to see you like undressing. I was like, well, it's a 28-minute long show.
Yes.
So I don't know that we have time. We'll have nothing else in the show. Because really there are so many.
Yeah, it was very funny, because I remember that. I was like, well, what? Well, and then trying to find a dress that actually would, and created the dress that actually would be able to snap in the right way for the under thing to open, and all that sort of stuff became very problematic.
Wow.
It's amazing how anything happened back in those days.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
Well, that's why it happened with arrangement. I think that's why everyone, you know, got married and arranged it.
You have to plan ahead.
Exactly, yeah. Tom, I have to ask specifically about, you know, these two people. Is there much in the way of kind of photo reference for them specifically?
There is, I wouldn't say that it's a lot of photo reference, and we all looked at the same photo reference. And, you know, the interesting thing about it is you have to take that photo references, because only one or two times did we actually copy something that they actually wore for very specific reasons. In the very last episode, they go on a road trip, and we recreated a moment that they actually did where they were wearing matching men's suits. And so that became one moment where we actually really did create, and we recreated the wedding outfits and one or two of the other outfits. But you have to take the essence of those pictures and the essence of that, and then translate it to these two beautiful people and how they then become the characters. Because just copying something that was perhaps right for Zelda is not necessarily creating the essence of Zelda for Christina.
Well, I suppose I'm wondering if this is too broad a question to ask you, but what is the essence of Zelda, do you think?
2 words or less.
Sorry.
Whoa. I don't know. I mean, I think she just had so much passion. You know, she was so. I think passion is the best way to describe it because she was so emotional and so reactive, and so driven and smart, and so I think passion is the best way to describe it, and I think that led to a lot of her brilliance and a lot of her torture. Yeah.
And David, you don't get off easily here.
You have to do it too.
I was just going to make a yeah. I think the biggest thing that I think one of F. Scott's greatest qualities, and I think one of his qualities that maybe brought his demise was he was so driven and so desperate to become somebody. He wanted to. I think because of his upbringing as well, he wanted to make something of himself, but which he did. But he was so desperate to cling on to that success, as Christina said, that it came to them quite early in life. And I think there was always this egocentric part of him that was very successful as a writer, but it was also quite challenging, at least in my opinion, it was also quite challenging for him on a personal level to always have that pressure to succeed, to come up with another amazing novel, to try and get to this status. I think that he really, really wanted to become one of America's greatest novelists. And then when you actually achieve that in a relatively short space of time, where do you go from there? When you have that sort of drive, what do you do? And so I think the question of what was his essence, I think his drive was huge in that respect.
Well, the one aspect of the show that I feel I have to ask about, because it sort of really struck me, was the relationship of a person with an audience. Whether it's Scott with his books or Zelda, on this social scene, and who she was to Scott as well, and who Scott was to her. I wonder, if that's something that you can kind of relate to, just as any human being, is that fear, of not looking right in the eyes of somebody else.
Yeah, I can relate to that, certainly. And I think that it was a huge problem for her. I think it was something that caused her, that was hard for her, because I think she had a very clear vision of herself, and she couldn't understand why other people didn't see her the way that she saw herself. And I think it's probably because they were very narcissistic and very selfish, and I don't want to say selfish is a negative connotation, but very self-involved. And I think that they were not able to have any kind of objectivity about themselves and how their behavior came across and what consequences that behavior would have.
And I think I would imagine at some point a slight fear that they brought some of their downfall on themselves.
I mean, definitely, they did.
Yeah. Well, listen. We have to talk. The other aspect of the show that I think is captured so beautifully, and Christina, I think maybe you can speak to it. Is the first of all the setting. These beautiful speakeasies, these beautiful houses, the Biltmore Hotel, all these incredible environments. But second of all, the music. there are songs in this show that are so striking, and they're all period songs, right? I mean,
Yeah, we have this one, that song, I mean, I just love that song. But there's a song after You've Gone. It's a song, they dance to it under a streetlight.
Oh,
Remember that song? And it's so haunting, and at first we were like, oh, it's so creepy sounding.
It's creepy. We had to do a romantic dance.
Yeah, we're like,
this
oh, I
is
love you so much. This
creepy.
creepy stuff is playing in the background. But after hearing it and really, I don't know, it just resonated in such a way, and it to me that song is so emotional and speaks so much to who they were, and that longing at the time. So I think, yeah, there's some really incredible and beautiful songs in this, but that in particular is one of my favorites, and something I hope thematically can kind of be brought back. And
I mean, why do you think it was so important to kind of have those cues in the film? I mean, there's also, of course, Marcello Zarvos's beautiful score. It just puts you in a kind of place, doesn't it?
yeah, I mean, you can't discount how powerful music is. And in filmmaking, you use every aspect that you can to help tell the story. Yeah.
I think coming from a, you were, quite obviously heavily involved behind the scenes, whereas little old me here, I just, did the shooting and then that was it. So seeing the music that was added on to whenever we did sort of ADR or the finished product, that was amazing, seeing the difference, even emotionally, a scene can take just with music in the background or the score playing that you haven't noticed before or you didn't even think about would come along, and it makes a huge impact.
Now, given that we've watched a couple of late season episodes, I think it's fair enough to, there's been some news today. I wonder if you could share that with us.
We got our pickup. Yes, we're all extremely thrilled that we have our pickup for season 2. So
the story ends at a very specific time. There's still so much of these people's lives to look at. Had you always had a kind of an arc in place for where you'd like to take the show in subsequent series?
Well, I mean, I think everybody involved in developing it has their favorite elements and their favorite parts of their lives and things they want to cover. And, that's part of collaborating and creating a series. And, we just got our pickup, so we still haven't really even had the big creative meeting about what season 2 is going to be like. But,
I was hoping
so
you'd show
much.
us this first episode today, but not.
Well, it's such a rich history, and their story is so fascinating and beautiful. It goes to beautiful places, and so it's exciting, which should be pretty exciting second season.
And some dark places as well. I mean,
Oh yeah, yes. Well, yeah. I mean, it's not all fun and games. There's going to be, certainly we would get more into the complexities of their marriage and what led to her breakdown, and all of that stuff will be in there.
Very exciting.
Yes.
Well, listen, I'd love to take some questions from the audience. I think we have some roving mics.
This question's for Tom. Did you do a lot of made-to-order for the costumes, or did you do a lot of swatching and refabrications for a lot of the, did you go shopping in vintage stores and reconstruct?
It was sort of I'll call it a grab bag of everything, because we had a very, very, very small shop. And so we were pulling and doing everything. So we had things made in LA, I had stuff made in London, I had stuff made in New York. We made a lot of stuff for these two. And also, but then, whenever we could, we also filled in a lot with real vintage. There's a lot of, I would say probably 60-40 between real vintage and made. And the stuff that was made was a combination of taking old dresses apart and putting two dresses to make one, that kind of stuff. There were some, part of the problem with swatching and getting fabric now is that the fabrics are completely different than they were back in 1920. So there was a disconnect sometimes between stuff that was actually made from real fabric today. You can get away a little better with men's wool suiting and that kind of stuff. So the menswear was easier to find wool from Europe and that kind of stuff. But as far as women's wear, most of that stuff was repurposed real vintage stuff.
Did you guys have a favorite piece, by the way, like a favorite costume for each of your characters?
I did.
Can you tell me what it is?
I hated that thing. That was the worst. Yeah.
August in a wool military suit in the South with crazy boots up to here. I felt so bad for
Those
him.
boots.
That was miserable.
He was really unhappy.
It was no, not that one. Surprisingly, no. I had. This is not going to be an interesting story because it's just a suit, but it was just a lovely three-piece navy blue suit. The only thing I didn't like were these collars.
Oh yes, the
stiff
collars, which were all real and all every day had to be pinned in and with all the.
I don't know how people did it back then.
They're difficult, and the starch every night that you have to wash them every night and restarch them and. So
I had to do that every night. I had to wash them every night.
The dressers were not.
His homework.
Every day was a little bit of a chore, but.
Christina?
I was constantly, the joke was, where's my jet black beading? Where's all my beading?
I know,
and that's later 20s.
Exactly.
He was like, well, you gotta wait. So my favorite were all there was this one, actually it's in 106 in the mirror where they're doing the whole thing and smoking. She's being taught by Tallulah. That dress that was all beaded and it was kind of see-through too. A little risque. And then that stole, and I just love all that stuff, like the stoles, but that was my favorite. And then I really liked the fox stole that we kept throwing around my neck.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah. Any other questions? There's one down here. Oh, the name of the song from earlier.
This song's called After You've Gone, but I can't remember the name of the person who sang it, but it's in our second episode.
And we have a question in the front row.
What are some of the most difficult scenes that you both had to work on together, and what are some of the funner ones, which I would imagine would be the
So the question is, what were some of the more difficult scenes, and what were some of the more fun ones?
For me, the revolving. There's a episode with a revolving door. That was 107, so you guys wouldn't have seen it, but revolving door, and she spins around the revolving door and singing, and then all of a sudden has a breakdown, and like a really violent breakdown. And so that one was very difficult for me. A lot of things, and acting in this small glass triangle, and then there were a lot of technical elements because they're trying to do close-ups while you're spinning, and the breakdown and the whole thing. So it wasn't as easy to really immerse myself in the moment and the emotions because of all the other elements. But ultimately, we found a way. And then there were other things too that were. It was difficult sometimes for us to find a way of expressing that kind of real vitriol for each other, but love at the same time. So that's a breakdown where it's just she hates him so much, but then has to very quickly come to a point of, but I love you, and I'm following you, and I'm being with you. So that kind of stuff was very difficult. And then the stuff that I thought was really fun, we really like yelling at each other. Yeah. So we didn't even know how much we liked yelling at each other until 108, that scene, and we were just like, wow, this is really fun.
Yeah.
The yelling.
The yelling's always great. You
It's
can
really
kind
great.
of let go of everything that you've held inside for 8 episodes. One of my most difficult ones was, and this is just purely, sort of more of a personal level was my wife was giving birth, not giving birth, she was heavily pregnant, and I had a big scene at Princeton.
Oh, yeah.
Which was, they had sort of, it wasn't supposed to happen that day, but then the shooting changed, and that's fine. And then was this big monologue type thing, and my wife had just gone into labour that morning. So I was trying to focus on the task at hand, but my mind was sort of elsewhere. But these people were,
We were like, leave. Why don't you just leave? What are you still doing here?
I remember going up
She's
to...
She's going to kill you. Go.
And she's great because she's like, no, I'm fine. It's okay. Everything's good. It's just the start. You don't have to worry about anything. And I'm saying, well, how far away are the contractions and all that? And then I go up to Christine. I say, like, so a minute apart, and like they're lasting for like 40 seconds. And she's like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, no, but my wife
all the way
says
up
it's
in
fine.
Harlem. She was down in Williamsburg and Brooklyn. It
Yeah.
was just like, you have to leave now.
Yeah, so that was...
But then it took 2 more days, so I was completely wrong.
Yeah, well, yeah. Lazy woman, that's what it was. It was that she couldn't be bothered.
But at least we got half a day off and then a whole other day off, too.
Well, and it worked out well because the first AD said to me, he's like, when she's going to, because they all knew that she was close. So I said, if you can get her to start going into labour on Thursday, that'd be great. We have Friday off.
Yeah.
So she actually goes into labour on a Thursday. They have Friday off, and it was all went well.
Yeah.
Wow, that's all I can say to that. We have time for one last question, I'm afraid, and it's right here. Yeah. Just wait for the mic.
So I guess because I guess watching the show and then it's just being such a big fan of F. Scott Fitzgerald in general. I was just wondering, for all three of you, do we have any favorite either short stories or like any novels or anything by F. Scott Fitzgerald? That being said, I did kind of like the whole foreshadow kind of, and I think it was episode 6 with the whole like, oh, you don't want to get in the film, like the whole writing with the whole kind of like the Last Tycoon kind of thing. So I was just curious if we had any favorites by him.
I actually really like The Last Tycoon. But I think my favorite is, well, I don't really know. I don't know what my favorite is. I want to say my favorite's Gatsby, but it's so like pathetic.
I know that's
And like
But it
expected.
sounds so.
But honestly,
But there's a reason it's the popular one,
yeah,
right?
it's my favorite one
Yeah.
because and I love too how revealing that one is. I mean, Gatsby really is Scott, and it's incredible that he wrote such a kind of clear depiction of himself, and you can only imagine the kind of self-loathing that he must have had and felt to have created that character so clearly. So I've always loved it for that reason. I thought it was just such incredible insight into this author.
Tom?
I would say the same thing. I know it sounds boring, but it's like, it's so, and it is such a beautiful story. It's so beautiful.
Heartbreaking and haunting.
Yes.
Oh.
That light at the end of the pier. How, like every day you walk down the street, it's like, how can you not? In New York, it's like a green light. You just sort of go, oh my God, there's the green light. I have to go to the green light. It's just like,
So on purpose, not because I'm lazy. Wow. No, I have focused more, before we started shooting and during shooting, I focused more on the books that he had already read or that he was writing at the time. So when it actually comes down to his best novels, I've read Great Gatsby 2 or 3 times, but not for a long time. I didn't read it before or during this shoot because I knew that we weren't even going to get close to that. So I read This Side of Paradise, and I bought this. It's ridiculous. I bought this book that's this big, and it has This Side of Paradise and a bunch of his short stories that he wrote and a few of the other things that he wrote for the papers. I thought it was a good idea because you got a collection of everything in the handy one thing. And then I realised that it's so heavy and so big that I had to cart it around everywhere, and should have just bought a Kindle or something. But I spent a lot of time reading This Side of Paradise, and I think it's one of the short stories, that was the first time I really got a handle of how eloquent his writing was. What's the name of it? Something to do with the pirate. It's a short story. It's based in a yacht. Anyway, I remember just reading the first paragraph. He's writing about how the water glistened again. I'm not going to do it justice here, but at that point in time is when I realised how proficient he was with his language. So that helped a lot. And then, as time goes on, I'll kind of delve more into his later works.
Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Christina Ricci, Davi Hoffman, Tom Brokaw.